If you have questions or want to contact me afterwards, my email address is assistbolton@gmavt.net. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have either at the end of the presentation or via email. Before we get to the emergency Bolton faced in December 2019, I'd like to take a moment to address where the town office stood in terms of emergency preparedness. Before VACDARN came into existence, I worked closely with Rachel Ona from Vasara to begin improving our emergency preparedness. A lot of the work we did is similar to the training and support that VACDARN is offering to municipal governments, museums, libraries, galleries, theaters, and cultural sites and organizations throughout the state. This training has proved to be invaluable in developing the knowledge and tools to face a crisis calmly and with confidence. My first step with Rachel was a workshop Vasara presented in May 2018, entitled Clerks Training, Emergency Preparedness, Response for Records Management. This workshop provided an excellent overview to emergency preparedness and gave us some tools to get started. Emergency preparedness is really a cycle, and this is my version of the cycle, not Rachel. So if there's any errors, Rachel, I'm sorry. Basically, for me, risk management, something just went wrong there. Getting used to a different computer for mine and how it's sensitive. Sorry about that. With me, I start at risk assessment, and once I've dealt with risk assessment, then we move on to a disaster plan, and from there making preparations and hopefully going back to risk assessment and just continuing to fine-tune things. Unfortunately, life is life, and all of us will have to deal with disaster of one form or another at some point in time. And once we have a disaster, we move on. Sorry, the mouse on this is much different from mine. We move on to the triage stage, which is another type of assessment. In triage, you're assessing the damage and trying to assess what type of priorities you're going to have. Then you move into the recovery phase where you're trying to take care of cleanup or dealing with damage and what's your response to the issues. Then you move on to response assessment and back to risk assessment, and it just keeps going through the cycle. For us, our number one priority has and always will be the vault. As town clerks, our primary function is the preservation and maintenance of the town's land records and vital statistics. Therefore, after the workshop, we immediately focused on maintaining an accurate inventory of our vault and doing a detailed risk assessment that included, again, the keyboard's not doing what I want. Included doing an on-site investment with updating our vault inventory, a risk assessment of what were the risks in the vault for flood, for smoke, for fire. Did we have backups of everything? Rachel came and gave us some advice and did a quick risk assessment with us. And during that, Rachel suggested that one of the first things we could do, and the easiest thing we could do, would be to reduce the risk of water damage by moving some things from the bottom shelves and making sure that nothing valuable was on those shelves. We did that within 24 hours of our meeting with Rachel. Then we just started doing an annual assessment, updating our risk, trying to figure out what little things we could pick away at over the year, and to develop and build on what we already have and to familiarize ourselves with what we had. But we didn't really write a disaster plan. It didn't exist yet. There were rudimentary notes. We had some rough ideas and we had thought about it, but there was no actual plan. Let's see. So by December 30th, 2019, we had a strong understanding of the risks to the vault and what we needed to do to mitigate those risks. But we didn't really have a lot spelled out. And it turned out that just having thought about it was a good thing. Now, we're going to move on to our flood. And I want you to imagine for a minute that you were walking into your office on the Monday before New Year's. As you turn to disarm the alarm system, you realize you hear a soothing waterfall, and then you realize that the soothing waterfall sound is coming from inside the building. It's not so soothing anymore. You quickly turn to see standing water everywhere you look and run to follow the waterfall sound and discover what looks like someone pouring 2 one-gallon jugs of water simultaneously from the kitchen ceiling. On the kitchen floor is 3 inches of standing water and the beginnings of a slurry from the disintegrating ceiling tiles that have fallen into the water. The kitchen slurry is spraying up onto every available surface, and water covers the surfaces of everything in the kitchen. Portions of ceiling tiles have floated into the conference room, and water is everywhere through the building. This is how Amy Grover, Bolton Town Clerk, started her day on Monday, December 30th, 2019. Bolton's hot water heater, which had been installed in the ceiling when the building was new in 2008, had burst. Post-flood plumbing forensics also revealed that the pipe from the drain pan was blocked by a piece of solder. Bottom line, our hot water heater had catastrophically failed and flooded virtually all of the office, every room in the building. The kitchen and much of the conference room had 3 inches of water, while the main office, actually, let me back up to the kitchen. Here, this first image is about 45 minutes after the water had been turned off, and you can see that our molding, the molding is a 6-inch molding, and the water line is about half of that. The water, once it had turned off, went down in the kitchen as water moved into the main office area and the conference room and increased the levels in those rooms. In this picture of the kitchen, you really get a sense of the ceiling tiles and the slurry on the floor, and you can see where the tiles had come from. The hot water heater was right in this tile area. And then this is the bathroom, which also had about 3 inches of water in it. This is the conference room. You can see a huge puddle over here where the water was the deepest in the conference room. Literally every corner of the room was wet. There's also papers. This is after we had started bringing some paper in to spread out that had gotten damp. This is the conference room quite a while later, hours later. When we'd moved stuff out from the walls, all of this stuff had been removed from some shelves. If you have pressboard in any of your offices, be aware that the pressboard acts as a wicking device, and the shelves were wet several feet above where the water actually was. The middle image is from the kitchen into my office area, and I was sitting in this chair about 4 feet out of the picture range at one point, waiting for a phone call and playing with my feet splashing in the water because it was about an inch and a half deep under my desk area. So The main office, the town's clerk's office, and this office, which is our zoning administrator's office, had about a 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches of water. This is our town clerk's office. And we really dreaded opening the vault, but we had to find out whether or not it had also flooded. Fortunately, thanks to the work we had already done with Rachel, we knew that the most important papers and documents were safe and secure because there was no way the water had gotten that high. So when we opened the door and saw all of this standing water, and this is after it had gone down a bit, we were much less anxious than we would have been without having done our work with Rachel. Water was throughout the vault, and the worst of it was back in this corner. We did have some things there, and all of that got damaged, but again, nothing was important. As always, the first concern in any disaster should be safety. Is it safe to be in the building? And we determined it was safe as long as people had rubber boots on to protect themselves for electricity and water. Even though we had turned the electricity off in the building, we still wanted to take that security precaution. And we needed to have earplugs on because, as you'll see very soon, sound became a huge issue. Part of triage, once you've determined what the safety issues are, is to determine what needs to be done and who's going to do it. We didn't really sit down and discuss this or follow a plan for this part. It was based on instinct and the things we had talked about and thought about before this incident occurred. Amy immediately called ServPro after having to track down their number. ServPro was great and arrived 40 minutes later and immediately started extracting water and the slurry with their truck-mounted industrial dry vac. This is towards the end of their time with the shop vac. 2.5 hours later, the carpet in this room, which is where I was playing in the water and splashing things around, the carpet looked dry. If you felt it, it still felt wet, but it had looked dry. They'd gotten so much out of it. By mid-afternoon, they had installed, mid-afternoon, they had installed 4 or 5 of these industrial dehumidifiers. There was one in each major room. There was also these industrial fans, and we had 40 of the industrial fans set up by Monday afternoon, and they kept adding more. All of this equipment ran nonstop for the next 8 days, with the office temperature turned up to 80 degrees to use heat to assist in the drying. We had removed all the furniture from the walls, and had spread papers and what we could of wet documents, or in one case, there's a poster out on flat surfaces, and basically created a very challenging obstacle course walking through the building. Sound measurements recorded over 84 decibels, and the temperature hovered around 90 degrees. This was really not a pleasant work environment, but we had to deal with it and move on to do the best we could while we recovered. On Friday, ServPro determined that the walls weren't drying quickly enough, so they drilled 3-inch holes every 12 to 18 inches on all the exterior walls, added more fans blowing directly into the wall to help with the drying there. Okay. While waiting for ServPro, we moved everything we could off the floors, and we were relieved to discover that risk assessment and abatement meant that almost everything in the vault was over 3 feet off the floor, and the only things lost to water were some office supplies, spare archival banker boxes, trifold displays, and a sandwich board. The earlier assessment and risk reduction measures had paid off in a huge way. Nothing, absolutely nothing irreplaceable was affected. Now, we weren't so lucky in the office. All of the computers and supporting electronics were on the floor. We quickly got them onto tables and dried them off, and after consulting our IT specialists, we opened the casings and to our relief discovered the insides were perfectly dry. We left the casings off so that any residual moisture could dry. Cords were either trashed if they were too damaged or put in recycling bins to keep them out of the water. Through all of this, Amy soldiered on, coming into the office every 8 hours, 24 hours a day for 8 days to empty the vault dehumidifier. ServPro had been unable to run a line from that dehumidifier to the sink because the vault door had to be closed when people weren't in the office. And Amy also had to complete critical work on payroll, the end of the year financials, and a FEMA application, which was under deadline. The vault dehumidifier alone drained 35 gallons of water from just the vault. Amy also regularly provided updates via Front Porch Forum, Facebook, and the town email lists about expected opening dates and how to contact her if documents were needed before the office reopened. Several researchers needed land record information, which was provided via fax and email. And this part of this crisis actually turned out to be excellent preparation for how we operated during COVID, because a couple of months later, we had to close for a couple of weeks and then had the office closed to researchers for longer, even though we were in the office. But we had already discovered that we could get information to the people who needed it and ways of getting around how do you deal with a card index if people can't access that. On Monday, ServPro concluded that the building was dry and removed their equipment. The cleanup took hours, washing the ceiling tile slurry off the kitchen walls, floors, stove, and cabinets, cleaning the bathroom, vacuuming the floor before moving furniture back, reassembling the computers. By the way, all the computers were tested and worked. We assessed the furniture damage, and bottom line on that, pressed board, also known as sawdust and glue, does not like water, and anything made of it collapsed when touched. And by collapsed, I mean Amy put her index finger on a bookshelf and it fell apart onto the floor. On Tuesday, the insurance adjuster, plumber, electrician, and contractor all came to check things out. Now, after every disaster, whether it's a large one or a relatively small one, it's vital to do what people in theater call a postmortem or a response assessment to determine what worked, what didn't work, and what lessons were learned. Here's our postmortem. We knew where our shutoff valve was for the water and where the electrical panel were. It turned out there was a more accessible shutoff valve, but at least we got the water turned off quickly. ServPro, the Stowe Winooski franchise, is absolutely fantastic. They were very responsive, highly professional, and worked like a well-oiled machine. And their phone number is now located in several places in our office. Knowledge of steps that had already been taken decreased anxiety and stress as we did the damage assessment. Damage was significantly less than it would have been because all the documents in the vault had already been mitigated and protected from water damage. We only lost a couple of maps which were damaged, and they were not in the vault and were easily replaced. We also discovered there's a big advantage to a building being built on a concrete slab. This actually greatly reduced the dangers of mold, and by getting ServPro in as quickly as we didn't even have to replace the carpet. It was clean, it was dry, and we've had no problems of mold in the almost 2 years since. Negative observations. The shutoff to the hot water heater was difficult to reach. We didn't know the location of the main shutoff. We didn't have all the phone numbers we needed immediately available. And all the CPUs were on the floor. We only lucked out and didn't have to replace every computer in the office. Now, we took a lot of steps to reduce future risks. Here's our new hot water Our new hot water heater, which is located on the floor in the bathroom inside a drain pan. Then over here, we have one of the best things that we purchased. This is called a Cricket, and it's right behind this pipe on the floor of the drain pan. And the Cricket provides an alarm if there's about 1/8 of an inch of water in that drain pan. There'll be an alarm that goes directly to our security firm, who will then contact town employees, so we'll know that there's a problem as soon as the problem occurs, instead of about 48 hours after it had occurred. We also installed humidity and temperature gauges in the vault so we can check it regularly and know what's happening in our vault. All electronics have been raised off the floor on metal, either shelving units like this one on the right, or here we've got them on monitor stands. And if you look at the picture above, I almost didn't put this picture in because it wasn't until I took it that I realized the wires I'd very carefully gotten off the floor. Over time, the command strips either became brittle and the hooks broke, or they came off the wall. And I've got stuff ordered so I can take care of getting the cords back off the floor, so that's not an issue anymore. We also built custom-made, my mind just went blank on the word, pallets to raise the file cabinets. So our file cabinets would be less likely to rust if they got wet, and so that the bottom drawers would have that added protection from moisture. We also worked with Rachel to determine whether or not our older books had been damaged from the moisture in the air, and both Amy and I received a tutorial on spotting mold blooms and analyzing damages to books so that we could monitor the situation. And I'm proud to say that there has been no sign of mold in anything in the vault. So our lessons learned. Risk assessments and steps to reduce risks are well worth the time and effort, even if you think the likelihood of a problem is low. Learn the infrastructure of your environment well. Know your priorities so you can automatically check on them. Have key emergency numbers ready. Call the professionals. They're well worth the money. While many residents had volunteered to come with shop vacs and help out, the job exceeded the abilities of house shop vacs, and the office would have been flooded for much longer, and we almost certainly would have had more damage, have lost more equipment, and probably have had a severe problem with mold. It really is worth relying on the professionals to do the job right early on. Have all your computers and electrical equipment off the floor. And just a couple of tips for constructing a building that we learned through this process. Drywall should not rest on your foundation. Radiant floor heat helps. We wished we had had it. Our drying time would have been about half what it was if we had had radiant floor heat as originally planned. And don't let them talk you into putting a hot water heater in the ceiling. So, VACDARN. VACDARN's an organization that can really help municipal offices, all kinds of offices that have large collections relating to culture. It provides a lot of beneficial support, training. For training, it's training in risk assessment, preparedness, planning. How do you triage and deal with recovery during a disaster? And the training is important because it helps prepare for a disaster. It builds confidence, reduces stress. VACDARN can also provide assistance during the recovery period when you really need it because you're dealing with a lot. Even a small crisis can lead to a lot of work and a lot of checking on the health and status of your collections. They are also working to provide caches of supplies, which is really important because in a major emergency, the type of supplies you need are very bulky, hard to get. And by having regional caches, VACDARN volunteers can pick up things, deliver it to where they're needed, and provide the support quickly without the organization having to figure out how to store all that bulk. So that's it for the crisis, but there are a couple of tips for just how do you do risk assessment and disaster planning. First off, take advantage of opportunities to learn. Know who to call for support, advice, and/or help at every process in the cycle or every step in the cycle. Make a long-term effort. When you first walk out of the disaster management or risk assessment type training, the number one feeling is being overwhelmed. Yes, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in, and looking at the big picture of what you have to do is totally overwhelming. But if you accept it's a long-term project that will never be finished, it helps. Because what you're going to do is each time you try and tackle something, you're a little bit better and further along on this road that's going to last forever. Make a reasonable to-do list of obtainable goals. I usually start with 3 or 4 items and chip away at them, doing a little bit at a time. And sometimes it may take a year or more to knock something off that little list. Regularly update what you've done. There are 5 top projects that I would recommend doing. First of all, an inventory. You need to know what you have if you want to protect it. Then a risk assessment. You can do a quick version like the 10 to 15 minute walk that Rachel and I initially did after the workshop. And because of that quick walk, we already protected our collection in an emergency. Use the inventory to figure out your risk assessment. I actually went through in detail at one point, taking every portion of our vault and assessing it and color coding it with what's at risk for fire, smoke, water damage, what hasn't been backed up. So I had a very detailed risk assessment, which actually took months to put together because I worked on it for 15 minutes at a time. Make a list of priorities. And when you have that list of priorities, if it's a major emergency, already have an assignment of who's going to take care of what priorities. And a great tool I got from Rachel, the PREP, a pocket response plan. And this is ours. On one side, I have this list of phone numbers, which includes people from the town and town government, state officials, residents who volunteered to help out in an emergency, the first responders, the state archivist, utilities, local resources, emergency providers. Please note, ServPro's right there. And other contacts, I'm still missing some because again, this is something I've picked away at a little at a time. And on the back, I have the sort of, it's called a checklist, but it's a list of questions and responsibilities and provides a framework for running through, have you thought of everything during crisis?